Today we're going to be replacing the thermostat on a 2005 Chrysler Town & Country minivan. Yesterday I was driving home and all of a sudden the temperature light came on and the car started dinging on me. I looked down and the temperature gauge was up past the high. As soon as I could, I got pulled over and got the car stopped. I assumed I would get out and find antifreeze dripping out somewhere, because as part of the process I had gone through, I had turned the heater on, turned the fans on high, temperature up to hot, put my hand over the vent, started coming out hot, but within about 15 seconds or so, just outside air temperature air was coming out the vent. So I thought I was out of antifreeze. Once I got stopped, I was surprised to see that there was no fluid leaks at all. I then noticed that the fill bottle, the overflow bottle, coolant reservoir was extremely full. And that was unusual because I check it quite frequently and it's usually between the min and the max, and here it was way up towards the top. The radiator hose was very hot and very stiff, so obviously a lot of pressure in the system. So of course one thing there you don't want to do is you don't want to open the radiator cap, and it's actually a little bit dangerous to be around the engine at that point, because if a hose would burst it could be a bad situation if you were to get caught in that steam cloud. Upon a little reflecting on it, I thought it's kind of odd that the heater stopped working, because the purpose of a thermostat, if it truly is stuck as I theorized, the purpose of a thermostat is to get that engine warmed up quickly. So the byproduct of that is you can get heat in the wintertime more quickly. So if the heater or thermostat is stuck, why is it that no hot air was blowing out the vent? The answer to that is, as I mentioned earlier, the overflow bottle was overfull, which meant that it expanded. A lot of the fluid went into the overflow bottle and the block was running low on water, and the heater core is one of the first things to get starved of fluid if you're low on coolant. So that explained that. One of these things is not like the other. Here's the one I just took out. See anything missing? Maybe the impeller? I don't know. I think this is supposed to have one. At first I thought, why even do a video on how to change this thermostat? Because as far as automotive repairs go, they don't get much simpler than this one. Basically in this case you just remove those two bolts, pull it out, put a new thermostat in there, new gasket, bolt it back together, you're done. I looked on YouTube just to see what was out there. One video, guy did a pretty good job, but he put it back together, forgot to put the thermostat in there. He was doing some other stuff where he was grinding off some of the factory tick marks that were pressed into the thermostat housing to hold it in place. I kind of questioned that. Come to find out, no, that's something you actually do have to do. But he made quite a few mistakes, but it was a good learning experience for him and to see what mistakes you can run into. The other one out there was some guy that had already replaced it and then spent 10 minutes talking about one thing or another, so there really wasn't a good video. I'm assuming if you're looking for a video on how to replace this thermostat, you're probably a novice. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through a fairly detailed video on how to replace this thermostat. As is often recommended on any kind of auto repair, the manual does say pull the negative battery terminal. I'm not going to do that. I don't see the purpose in it. You can pull this hose off of the thermostat housing. That's not necessary. You can pull these plug wires to get them out of the way to give you a little bit more room. Not completely necessary. However, if you do, note the numbers on them. This is 2, 4, and 6 on these original factory wires. They do have the numbers on them. And ideally, if this little pin here, which we'll pull up off this stud, if the wires are in there in the right way, it should make sense on the direction that they are, at least on the studs that they go back onto here. I may go ahead and remove these wires just to get a little better shot at what we're doing in here for the video. One caution is if this engine is hot like it was, this hose here was very, very hot and extremely stiff. If this hose is stiff and extremely hot, you definitely do not want to remove this radiator cap. If you remove this radiator cap, the very hot fluid inside the radiator would immediately burst into steam, and a huge volcano of hot fluid and steam comes pouring out of there, and it will scald you. Also, if your engine does overheat like mine was doing, and this hose is extremely stiff, that means you've got a lot of pressure in there. At that point, you're extremely vulnerable to a hose bursting, so it's best really not to even be around the engine at that point. Let it cool down, then do some checks. A few things to note about the new thermostat. One, it is not symmetrical, it's oblonged. This little vent hole here has, I think they call it a jiggle rod or something like that that's in there. That needs to be at the 12 o'clock straight up position. It also has a couple little areas that are notched out so that this thermostat will only fit in that housing in one direction, and it's going to go in there like this. Spring end goes into the engine block, this end goes into the radiator hose and faces the front of the car. Several of the comments on some of the YouTube videos I read said that you don't need to drain the fluid because this thermostat housing is up toward the top of the block, so not much fluid comes out. However, it appeared that in practice that was not always the case. So I'm going to drain a little bit of fluid, take the radiator cap off, suck a little bit of fluid out of there, not much, maybe a quart or whatever I can get out of there with a little suction turkey baster. You could find the petcock on the bottom of the radiator, loosen that. However, my experience with those is, one, you'll either break it, or two, if you're lucky enough to get it open, it'll be plugged anyway. The other option is to remove a hose and catch some of the fluid that comes out when you break the hose loose. In this case, I think we're just going to pull a little bit of fluid out of the radiator. We'll put a rag or two underneath this thermostat housing and catch any few drops that come out of that. This is a great time if you want to replace that upper radiator hose. You can do that now. I've done mine not too long ago, so we're not going to mess with that. At this point, we're just going to remove these spark plug wires. Get those back out of the way. And then remove these two bolts. Again, after draining a little bit of fluid from the radiator, we're going to put a rag underneath here to catch any fluid that comes out. Pull this radiator housing off. Note the direction the thermostat's installed. When I went to the auto parts store today to pick up a thermostat, this is what they had in stock, so that's what I got. This was like 10 bucks. They tried to give me a paper gasket for like $2.99 or something. but what I had seen was that there was a better gasket out there with this silicone impregnated style. I asked them, they came up with this Felpro gasket number here, and this does not require any silicone to be applied to it. If I had gone with the $2.99 paper gasket, I would have wanted to apply some RTV silicone to it, but none is required with this particular gasket. Felpro is pretty proud of this gasket, or at least the parts store is. This was like $6.99. The thermostat itself was like 10 bucks, so got about as much in the gasket as I do in the thermostat. Going to come in with a 13mm socket. Got a wobbly on here for this top one. Not too bad. This bottom one, we'll go ahead and get this top one. Go ahead and get that top one out of there. Oh yeah. Gotta love that. That's why we have magnets. Alright, well, you saw that socket fly off. I can't find it. Car ate it, so we'll take backup plan, go with my 13mm deep well socket. Doesn't quite fit in this top one as well, but since I had it cracked loose, not an issue. I can already see this thing's moving around, so. By the way, this is the first time this has been changed. It's a 2005. I've owned it since it was new. This has never been changed, and I've got about 112,000 on it, so pretty low miles, but 112,000. Apparently the thermostat has failed, so keep that in mind. Might want to go ahead and proactively replace this, since it is pretty easy to do, which is good. Give you a little shot of how that's currently in there. Again, the spring end goes into the block. Here's the original gasket, which is kind of that silicone impregnated. Came right off the block. We'll have to pry it off of this housing. Go ahead and I'll get this gasket off of there, then we're going to talk a little bit about getting this thermostat out of the housing. Didn't require any special tools. I thought I was going to have to get a putty knife or something, but no, I just grabbed the gasket. It cracked off of there, so there's the gasket. Now this thermostat is actually held into this housing with a couple of little areas where at the factory they have kind of smushed it down and pinched that thermostat in there. So of course that their guys wouldn't have to try and balance it and keep it into place as they put it back in there. But from what I understand, we're going to have to kind of grind those little areas down so that our new thermostat fits in there. It is keyed. The thermostat is keyed, so it will only fit in one direction. Again, note that this vent port or jiggler rod is oriented straight up and down at the 12 o'clock position. So jiggler rod straight up and down, 12 o'clock position. Alright, this thermostat is from the factory in there pretty good. I mean, you can pry on it and it's not going to pop out of there. If you jammed a screwdriver in here and pulled up on it, it would pop out. But what you're going to note is there's two locations where there's a little notch cut out of the thermostat. These are the alignment points. So there's an alignment point here and here, but then there's two places, one up here where it's kind of like they've taken a punch and smacked the housing to kind of bend it over the edge of this thermostat housing, and there's another point down here where again it's kind of like they took a little punch and smacked it right there, That's what's holding the thermostat in the thermostat housing. I'd like to get this thing out of there without doing a tremendous amount of damage to it. I just don't see a great way to do it. This is a plastic housing, so you want to be careful that you don't ruin your plastic housing in all your digging and prying around. I could just take a screwdriver, put it in here and pull this out, but I kind of wanted to keep this thermostat in decent condition because I was going to take it in and put it in a boiling pot of water and just make myself feel 100% sure that it did not open up. Okay, well, that's how you get her out of there. Pry it up out of there. Now I can kind of see where these little indentation marks are. Okay, I'm going to take my high dollar $10 Dremel tool here and very carefully come in here and polish off this little bump right here and the little bump on the other side. I've got those two areas ground down. Hopefully didn't do too much damage to the face where the thermostat seats down there, but it will drop in and out of there now. So you're going to want to go ahead and just scrape this, make sure you don't have any gasket material left on that. Get this good and cleaned up, get the block housing good and cleaned up, and then we'll be ready to put her back together. There's probably some high-tech super sensitive surface coating that I'm polishing off here, but I just want to go ahead and just smooth that out a little bit. Now I think we're ready to go. I'm an anti-seize kind of guy, but I don't want to make a big mess with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure there's nothing in these thread holes with one side of a Q-tip, and then with the other side of a Q-tip I'm going to roll it in some anti-seize. Just put some in these on the threads. Ready to go back together. Both surfaces are clean. We want to go ahead and put the thermostat back in here. Again, spring side goes into the block. This side goes into the housing facing the radiator. We want the jiggle pin, which is really a device for allowing air to move out. We want that to be up at the 12 o'clock position. So that's in this area. Get those alignment pins lined up. Put the gasket on. Seems to be symmetrical and non-directional. So the bad thing about not having those little factory dents is, all this stuff wants to fall out on you. But if we can get these bolts in here, that should kind of hold everything together a little bit while we move it into position. All right. Again, fancy $6 gasket, does not require any RTV. It has the impregnated silicone. Move that into position. Jiggle pin straight up at 12 o'clock. Wishing I wouldn't have lost my shallow 13mm at this point. Alright, kind of one last check here. Making sure everything looks like it's in position. My battery ran out right at the right at the point where everybody needed to see what was going on. So we got these snugged down kind of evenly. And once they were snugged down, probably about 15 foot-pounds, 150 inch-pounds. Just a nice crank on there, nothing crazy. At this point, we're ready to refill the radiator. We'll put on the we'll put the spark plug wires back on. Again, it goes 2, 4, 6. The factory ones have numbers on them. This is 2. Kind of clicks on there. 4 and 6. We'll be ready to give it a check. Wouldn't quite all go back in there. You want to kind of let the bubbles work their way out. Squeeze the radiator hose gently a few times. See what you can get in. If you got a little bit left over, go ahead and just put it in the coolant reservoir. Go ahead and get that radiator cap put back on. Be a great time to buy a new one of these. They don't last forever either. Alright, I'm boiling the old thermostat in hot water. It's been in there for quite some time. It's not popping out, it's not opening. So I'm getting that good fuzzy feeling that it was probably bad, and that was the cause of all my problems. Some needle nose pliers. Still completely closed. You want to be careful about ever starting out a video saying, oh, this is going to be really simple. About as easy as it can get for an automotive repair job. First thing that happens, I lose my 13mm socket down in here. Probably never to be seen again, so got a new one of those, no big deal. Get the thermostat replaced, take it out for a test drive. Strangely enough, I'm driving around the neighborhood, I'm not getting any heat. I think that's kind of strange. Then all of a sudden, boom, the thermostat takes off, creeping up rather quickly towards H. Same thing, ding, 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 high temp light comes on. I hightail it back home. I do some research on the internet. Appears the most next likely source is the water pump. Apparently these nifty water pumps have nice plastic impellers. These are plastic. The impeller is plastic. You wouldn't think they could just all of a sudden all shear off, but that seems like what happened. So I'll have a video on replacing that. If you want to look, there's also one out there. 2005 Dodge Caravan, no heat, overheating, water pump problem.